Hello. Welcome to another exciting little story time with me. Um, this is, as always, Black Metal and Brews, and I am Ben, and I'm here to read you a story. Uh, I thought about maybe having a beer or something tonight, but I have a headache. So, we're going to read again from my George Saunders collection, Pastoralia. Um, I think, well, this is a long one. Would you like a long story tonight? Nobody's watching this, I don't imagine, but after the fact, you probably will. Um, let's read a short one, and then maybe another short one, and then I've got some poems. This is called The Falls. The Falls by George Saunders. Funny how that is. I'll get more sip of water before I begin here. Morse found it nerve-wracking to cross the St. Jude grounds just as school was being dismissed, because he felt that if Catholic children, they might think he was a wacko or pervert, and if he didn't smile, they might think he was an old grouch made bitter by the world, which surely, he felt, by certain yardsticks, he was. Sometimes he wasn't entirely sure that he wasn't even a wacko of sorts, although certainly he wasn't a pervert, of that he was certain. Or relatively certain. Being overly certain, he was relatively sure, was what eventually made one a wacko. So humility was the thing, he thought, arranging his face into what he thought would pass for the expression of a man thinking fondly of his own youth. A face devoid of wackiness or perversion. Humility was the thing. The school sat among maples on a hillside that sloped down to the wide Taganak River, which narrowed and picked up speed and crashed over Bryce Falls a mile downstream near Morse's small rental house. His embarrassingly small rental house, actually, which nevertheless was the best he could do, and for which he knew he should be grateful, although at times he wasn't a bit grateful and wondered where he'd gone wrong, although at other times he was quite pleased with the crooked little blue shack covered with peeling lead paint, and felt great pity for the poor stiffs renting hazardous shitholes even smaller than his hazardous shithole, which was how he felt now as he came down into the bright sunlight and continued his pleasant walk home along the green river lined with expensive mansions whose owners he deeply resented. Morse was tall and thin and as gray and sepulchral as a church about to be condemned. His pants were too short, and his face periodically broke into a tense, involuntary grin that quickly receded, as if he had just suffered a sharp pain. At work he was known to punctuate his conversations with brief, wild laughs and gusts of inchoate enthusiasm and subsequent embarrassment, expressed by a sudden plunging of the hands into his pockets, after which he would yank his hands out of his pockets, too ashamed of his own shame to stand there merely grimacing for even an instant longer. From behind him on the path came a series From behind him on the path came a series of arrhythmic whacking steps. He glanced back to find Aldo Cummings, an odd duck who, though nearly 40, still lived with his mother. Cummings didn't work, and had his bangs cut straight across, and wore gym shorts, even in the dead of winter. Morse hoped Cummings wouldn't collar him. When Cummings didn't collar him, and in fact passed by without even returning his nervous, self-effacing grin, Morse felt guilty for having suspected Cummings of wanting to collar him, then miffed that Cummings, who collared even the City Hall cleaning staff, hadn't tried to collar him. Had he done something to offend Cummings? It worried him that Cummings might not worried him that he was worried about whether a nut like Cummings liked him. Was he some kind of worrywart? It worried him. Of course. Why should he be worried when all he was doing was going home to enjoy his beautiful children without a care in the world? Although, on the other hand, there was Robert's piano recital, which was sure to be a disaster, since Robert never practiced and they had no piano, and weren't even sure where or when the recital was, and Annie, God bless her, had eaten the cardboard keyboard he'd made for Robert to practice on. When he got home, he would make Robert a new cardboard keyboard and beg him to practice. He might even order him to practice. He might even order him to make his own cardboard keyboard, then practice, although this was unlikely, because when he became forceful with Robert, Robert blubbered. And Morse loved Robert so much he couldn't stand to see him blubbering. Although if he didn't become forceful with Robert, Robert tended to lie on his bed with his baseball glove over his face. Good God, but life could be less than easy. Not that he was unaware that it could certainly be a lot worse, but to go about in such a state, pulse high, face red, worried sick, that someone would notice how nervous one was certainly less than ideal, and he felt sure that his body was secreting all kinds of harmful chemicals, and that the more he worried about the harmful chemicals, the faster they were pouring out of wherever it was that they came from. When he got home, he would sit on the steps and enjoy a few minutes of centered breathing while reciting his mantra, which was calm down. Calm down. Before the kids came running out and grabbed his legs, and sometimes even bit him quite hard in their excitement, and Ruth came out to remind him in an angry tone that he wasn't the only one who'd worked all day. And as he walked, he gazed out at the beautiful Taganak in an effort to absorb something of its serenity, but instead found himself obsessing about the faulty latch on the gate, which theoretically could allow Annie to toddle out of the yard and into the river. And he pictured himself weeping on the shore, and to eradicate this thought, started manically whistling the Stars and Stripes Forever, while slapping his hands against his sides. Cummings bobbed past the restored grist mill, pleased at having so decisively snubbed Morse, a smug member of the power elite in this conspiratorial village, one of the league of oppressive oppressors who wouldn't know the lot of the struggling artist if the lot of the struggling artist came up with great and beleaguered dignity and bit him on his polyester ass. Over the Pine Street Bridge was a fat cloud. To an interviewer in his head, Cummings said he felt the bright day even finer and brighter because of the possibility of its loss, the possibility of its ephemeral loss, the ephemeral loss of the day to the fleeting passages of time, preening nascent time, the blackguard. Time made wastrels of us all, did it not, with its gaunt cheeks, and its tombly reverberations, and its admonishing glances with bony fingers. Bony fingers pointed as if in admonishment, as if to say, I admonish you to recall your own eventual nascent death, which, being on its way, human, is forthcoming, mortal coil, and don't think its ghastly pall won't settle on your furrowed brow, pronto, once I select your fated number from my very dusty book with the selfsame bony finger with which I'm pointing at you now, you vanity of vanities, you luster, you shirker of duties, as you shuffle after your worldly pleasure centers. That was some good stuff, if only he could remember it through the rest of his stroll and the coming storm, to scrawl in a passionate hand on his yellow pad. He thought with longing ardor of his blank yellow pad. He thought with longing ardor of his blank yellow pad, on which this selfsame day his fame would be wrought. No, on which the selfsame day the first meager scrawlings which would presage his nascent burgeoning fame would be wrought, or rather writ, and someday someone would dig up his yellow pad and virtually cry eureka when they realized what a teeming fragment of minutia and yet crucial minutiae had been found. And wouldn't all kinds of literary women in short black jackets want to meet him then? In the future, he must always remember to bring his pad everywhere. The town had spent a mint on the riverfront, and now the burbling, smashing Taganak ran past a nail salon and a restored grist mill, and a cafe in a former coal tower, and a quaint public square, where some high school boys with odd haircuts were trying to kick a soccer ball into the partly open window of a parked Colt with a joy so belligerent and obnoxious that it seemed that they believed themselves the first boys ever to walk the face of the earth, which Morse found worrisome. What if Annie grew up and brought one of those freaks home? Not one of these exact freaks, of course, since they were approximately 15 years her senior, although it was possible that at 20 she could bring home one of these exact freaks, who would then be approximately 35, albeit over Morse's dead body. Although in his heart, he knew he wouldn't make a stink about it even if she did bring home one of these freaky snots who had just succeeded in kicking the ball into the Colt and were now jumping around joyfully bumping their bare chests together while grunting like walruses. And in fact, he knew perfectly well that old freak from his home, he would likely offer him coffee or a soft drink in an attempt to dissuade him from corrupting Annie, who for God's sake was just a baby. Because Morse knew very well the kind of man he was at heart, timid of conflict, conciliatory to a fault, pathetically gullible, and with a pang he remembered Len Beck, whose senior year had tricked him into painting his ass blue. If there had actually been a secret Blue Assers Club, if the ass painting had in fact been required for membership, it would have been bad enough. But to find out on the eve of one's prom that one had painted one's ass blue simply for the amusement of a clique of unfeeling swimmers who subsequently supplied certain photographs to one's prom date, that was too much. He had been glad, quite glad actually, at least at first, when Beck, drunk, had tried and failed to swim to Foley's snag and had been swept over the falls in the dark of night, the great tragedy of their senior year, a tragedy that had mercifully eclipsed Morse's blue ass in the class's collective memory. Two red-headed girls sailed by in a green canoe, drifting with the current. They yelled something to him, and he waved. Had they yelled something insulting? Certainly it was possible. Certainly today's children had little respect for authority, although one had to admit there was always Ben Akbar, their neighbor, a little Pakistani genius, who sometimes made Morse look askance at Robert. Ben was an all-state cellist on the wrestling team, who was unfailingly sweet to smaller kids, and toll-painted and could do a one-handed push-up. Ah, Ben Schmen, Morse thought. 10 Bens weren't worth a single Robert. Although he couldn't think of one area in which Robert was superior or even equal to Ben, the little smarty pants, although certainly he had nothing against Ben being a mere boy. But if Ben thought for a minute that his being more accomplished and friendly and talented than Robert somehow entitled him to lord it over Robert, Ben had another think coming. Not that Ben had ever actually lorded it over Robert. On the contrary, Robert often lorded it over Ben, or tried to, although he always failed, because Ben was too sharp to be taken in by a little con man like Robert, and Morse's face reddened at the realization that he had just characterized his own son as a con man. Boy, oh boy, could life be a torture? Could life ever force a fellow into strange, dark place from which he found himself doing graceless, unforgivable things like casting aspersions on his beloved firstborn? If only he could escape Blazkor and do something significant, such as discover a critical vaccine. But it was too late, and he had never been good at biology, and in fact had flunked it twice. But some kind of moment in the sun would certainly not be unwelcome. If only he could be a tortured prisoner of war, who not only refused to talk, but led the other hymns at great personal risk. If only he could witness an actual miracle, or save the president from an assassin, or win the lotto and give it all to charity. If only he could be part of some great historical event, like the codgers he saw on PBS, who had been slugged in the Haymarket riot, or known Medgar Evers, or lost beatific mothers on the Titanic. His childhood dreams had been so bright. He had hoped for so much. It couldn't be true that he was a nobody, although, on the other hand, what kind of somebody spends the best years of his life swearing at a photocopier? Not that he was complaining. Not that he was unaware he had plenty to be thankful for. He loved his children. He loved the way Ruth looked in bed by candlelight when he had wedged the laundry basket against the door that wouldn't shut because the house was settling alarmingly. Loved the face she made when he entered her. Loved the way she made light of the blue ass story, although he didn't particularly love the way she sometimes trotted it out when they were fighting. For example, on the dreadful night when the piano had been repossessed, or the way she blamed their poverty on his passivity within the earshot of the kids, or the fact that at the height of her infatuation with Robert's karate instructor, Master Lee, she'd been dragging Robert to class as often as 6 times a week, the poor little exhausted guy. But the point was, in spite of certain difficulties, he truly loved Ruth. So what if their bodies were failing and fattening, and they undressed in the dark, and Robert admired strapping athletes on television while looking askance at Morse's rounded, pimpled back? It didn't matter, because someday, when Robert had a rounded, pimpled back of his own, he would appreciate his father, who had subjugated his petty personal desires for the good of his family, although, God willing, Robert would have a decent career by then and could afford to join a gym and see a dermatologist. And Morse stopped in his tracks, wondering what in the world 2 little girls were doing alone in a canoe speeding toward the falls, apparently oarless. Cummings walked along, gazing into a mythic, dusky arboreal wood that put him in mind of the archetypal vision he had numbered 114 in his book of archetypal visions, on which Mom, that nitwit, had recently spilled grape pop. Vision 114 concerned standing on the edge of an ancient dense wood at twilight, with the safe harbor of one's abode behind and the deep wild ahead, replete with dark, fearsome bears looming from albeit dingy covens. What would that twitching, nervous wage-slave Morse think if he were to dip his dim brow into the heady brew that was the archetypal visions? Morse, Cummings thought. I'm glad I'm not Morse. Trudging home to his threadbare brats in the gathering loam, born, like the rest of his ilk, with their feet of clay thrust down the maw of conventionality, content to cheerfully work lemming-like in moribund cubicles, while comparing their stocks and bonds between bouts of tedious lawn mowing, then chortling while holding their suckling brats to the Nintendo breast. That was a powerful image, Cummings thought, one that he might develop some brooding night into a Herculean proem that some Hollywood smoothie would eat like a hotcake so he could buy Mom a Lexus and go with someone leggy and blousy to Paris after taking some time to build up his body with arm curls so as to captivate her physically as well as mentally. And in Paris, the leggy girl, in perhaps tight leather pants, would sit on an old-time bed with a beautiful shawl or blanket around her shoulders and gaze at him with doe eyes as he stood on the balcony brooding about the Parisian rain and so forth. And wouldn't Morse and his ilk stew in considerable juice when he sent home a postcard just to be nice? Wouldn't the village fall before him on repentant knees when T-shirts imprinted with his hard-won visage, his heraldic leonine visage, one might say, were available to all at the 5 and dime, and he held court on the porch in a white Whitman-esque suit while Mom hovered behind him, getting everything wrong about his work and proffering inane snacks to his manifold admirers? And wouldn't revenge be sweet when such former football players as Ned Wentz began begging him for lessons in the sonnet? And all that was required for these things to come to pass was some paper and pens and a quixotic blathering talent, the likes of which would not be seen again soon, the critics would write, all of which he had in spades, and he had rounded the last bend before the falls, euphoric with his own possibilities, and saw a canoe, the color of summer leaves, ram the steep upstream wall of the snag, The girls inside were thrown forward and shrieked with open mouths over frothing waves that would not let them be heard as the boat split open along some kind of seam and began taking on water in doomful fast quantities. Cummings stood stunned, his body electrified, hairs standing up on the back of his craning neck, thinking, I must do something. Their faces are bloody, but what? Such fast, cold water. Still, I must do something. And he stumbled over the berm uncertainly, looking for help, but finding only a farm field full of tall, dry corn. Morse began to run. In all probability, this was silly. In all probability, or if not, help was already on the way. Although certainly it was possible that the girls were not safe on shore and help was not on the way. And in fact, it was even possible that the help that was on its way was him, which was worrisome because he had never been good under pressure and in a crisis often stood mentally debating possible options with his mouth hanging open. Come to think of it, it was possible, even probable, that the boat had already gone over the falls or hit the snag. He remembered the crew of the barge Fat Chance, rescued via rope bridge in the early Reagan years. He hoped several sweaty, decisive men were already on the scene and that one of them would send him off to make a phone call. Although what if on the way he forgot the phone number and had to go back and ask the sweaty, decisive man to repeat it? What if his failure got back to Ruth and she was filled with shame and divorced him and forbade him to see the kids, who didn't want to see him anyway because he was such a panicky screw-up? This was certainly not positive thinking. This was certainly an example of predestining failure via negativity. Because, who could tell, maybe he would stand in line assisting the decisive men and incur a nasty rope burn and go home a hero wearing a bandage, which might cause Ruth to regard him in a more favorable sexual light. And they would stay up all night celebrating his new manhood and exchanging sweet words between bouts of energetic lovemaking. Although what kind of thing was that to be thinking at a time like this with children's lives at stake? He was bad, that was for sure. There wasn't an earnest bone in his body. Other people were simpler and looked at the world with clearer eyes. But he was self-absorbed and insincere and mucked everything up. And he hoped this wasn't one more thing he was destined to muck up, because mucking up a rescue was altogether different from forgetting to mail out the invitations to your son's birthday party, which he had recently done. Although certainly they had spent a small fortune rectifying the situation, stopping just short of putting an actual pony on Visa. But the point was, this was serious, and he had to bear down. And throwing his thin legs out ahead of him, awkwardly bent at the waist, shirt tails trailing behind and bum knee hurting, he remonstrated with himself to put aside all self-doubt and negativity and prepare to assist the decisive men in whatever way he could once he had rounded the bend and assessed the situation. But when he rounded the bend and assessed the situation, he found no rope bridge or decisive men, only a canoe coming apart at the base of the snag and two small girls in matching sweaters trying to bail with a bait bucket. What to do? This was a shocker. Go for help? Sprint to the outlet mall and call 911 from Knife World? There was no time. The canoe was sinking before his eyes. The girls would be drowned before he reached Route 8. Could one even swim to the snag? Certainly one could. Was he a good swimmer? He was mediocre at best. Therefore, he would have to run for help. But running was futile, because there was no time. He had just decided that, and swimming was out of the question. Therefore, the girls would die. They were basically dead, although that couldn't be. That was too sad. What would become of the mother who this morning had dressed them in matching sweaters? How would she cope? Soon her girls would be nude and bruised and dead on a table. It was unthinkable. He thought of Robert, nude and bruised and dead on a table. What to do? He fiercely wished himself elsewhere. The girls saw him now, and with their hands appeared to be trying to explain that they would be dead soon. My God, did they think he was blind? Did they think he was stupid? Was he their father? Did they think he was Christ? They were dead. They were frantic, calling out to him, but they were dead. as dead as the ancient dead, and he was alive. He was needed at home. It was a no-brainer. No one could possibly blame him for this one. And making a low sound of despair in his throat, he kicked off his loafers and threw his long, ugly body out across the water. Well, that's The Falls by George Saunders. What a hell of a story, huh? I love that one. It's really disturbing in a way, but also very, very human. I really love it. Gosh. How many pages was that even? It wasn't that long at all. Yeah, it's a real short one, but it took me a while to read it. I could read one that's about twice the length. That would put us probably about an hour and a half in here. Do we want to do that? I don't know. Maybe I'll just read some poems. Maybe this will be a shorter one tonight. Because I have a headache. So yeah, let's do that. Besides, I was meant to go purchase a couple more books with short stories or poetry in them today, and I failed to do that because I got outside, and even though it looked nice out, it was really cold and windy, and I didn't feel like walking 2 miles to the bookstore that I like. I'm sure there's other bookstores closer, but I don't know if they'd have the selection I want. The store that I like to go to is it's called Human Relations. It's where I got this book that I just read from. I'm also thinking if there's interest, soon I'm going to start a thing where I do a selection of videos and read this in full. Isaac Asimov's The Gods Themselves. Really, really nice science fiction work. It's about 300 pages. I do it over the course of a number of videos. I would not do it all at once because I'm not really trying to suffer that much. So maybe if you'd like that, let me know. In the comments or wherever the hell else you'd like to let me know. Anything. So I guess I'm going to pick a couple of poems out of the Heartworm Reader. This was issued, of course, by Heartworm, which is the Heartworm Press. It's run by the fella, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Wesley Isold from Cold Cave. Of course, you got Alan Vega with a cat on the cover. Alan Vega from Suicide, rest in peace. Wonderful artist. And it's got poems by people like Alan Vega, Genesis Breyer Peorage, Alexis Marshall, the singer of the band Daughters, Ross Farrar from Ceremony, many other people. I purchased it actually because my friend Zach has some poems in here. I will not read Zach's poetry. I will embarrass Zach if I did that. Or mostly I'd embarrass myself. I've read almost none of these because I like taking a book like this, and rather than just sitting and thumbing through it, I like to pick it up and let something take me. I don't know about you. Maybe that's how you work too. Okay. So the first poem I'm going to read is it's by Sarah Jean Alexander. I'm not sure who that is, but so far everyone who I've looked up who has work in this book is a musician or interesting artist of some sort. And this is called Simple Explanations. I haven't read it. I I'm literally just scanning it now for the first time. So, yeah. Okay. We probably won't go on much longer because I know that there is. Read this poem and then maybe I'll call it good. Sorry, it's so short today. A waste is for holding on to when you want to give more than you can take. A bitch is a good thing to have in your life if you've been blessed enough to know one. A nap is for both the weak and the strong, and no one in between. A bowl is the perfect tool for carrying, eating, sitting, smoking, but you already knew this one. A lawn has never been necessary for as long as humankind has existed. Distance is just one of those things we can stop talking about forever. We can stop talking about distance forever. So, yeah, just out of respect to my roommates who apparently, are visiting with friends, we're going to make this one short today. Thank you so much for being here. But seriously, let me know if you would like me to actually start reading entire works of classic fiction on this. It might be fun for me. I might lose my voice a little because I don't know about you, I'm not accustomed to speaking at length anymore, really. Now that I don't have to talk ever, except for when I'm on YouTube. So let me know if that would be of interest to you. It's something I may do anyway, but it would be maybe the difference between me filming it and uploading it later or me doing it live, I guess. Don't know. I don't even know if it's legal to do that. Like, basically be uploading a book on tape. Fuck if I know what that looks like, how that plays out. Anyway, again, sorry this was so short today. But let's do a beer and music video soon. I'd considered, doing a short story and then doing beer and music stuff after, but again, got a headache, and we're not going to hurt ourselves for the entertainment of others. Not how I roll. So, thanks for being here. It's always a delight.